You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith Radio. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney. Joining me, as always, is my trusted co-host, Ben Triplett. So, Ben, you posed this question, and we didn't discuss bringing this up on the air, but we were talking about 80s, like, horror films.
Mm-hmm.
And...
horror, quote-unquote.
Yeah. But the movies where you have the teens are out doing something in the woods they're not supposed to, and they're drinking, and then they run off in the woods to have sex. And those are the ones that always get killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would horror films be kind of a moral play?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Some of those.
There's an ethic to the horror films?
I can't remember. There's like a documentary that talks about Michael Myers sort of representing like fate and Jason representing moral like punishment, or I can't remember the argument, but it was really interesting. I think it was probably reading a little too much into it. But
so those were just more creative like versions of early Christian movies, right?
Yeah.
So the Christians, no, especially like with Christians. I mean, that's I think one of the biggest things that we have with Christian art, if you can call it that, is that it's always really on the nose.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
There's no room to think.
Yeah, think or interpret. No, we're going to tell you exactly what you need. You know,
right?
Which is the problem with a lot of the Christian movies. And I never thought about being inspired by the Halloween series,
horror movies
in general. I don't know.
Or No Country for Old Men, if you want something a little more recent. But
that's true. Yeah. There's that was an interesting one too.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's the Coen brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? Okay. Yeah. But they always have like some sort of a deep morality going through that, or maybe not even morality, but it's like moral questions that characters are confronted with in that nature. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so today we are going to be talking. This all comes from an article that was in the New York Times called "What Religion Would Jesus Belong To?" Now, the title of this. It's a total misnomer. It's not like it's a red herring for the article, but it turned into clickbait for me. It's by Nicholas Kristof, and really, what I want to use this for is to not really go through it like we do a lot of times. We're kind of critiquing and using it to talk through, but I want to use a lot of this as just a sounding board, or some sort of a creative thought space to go through some of the ideas that are being presented here, in this. And it's far too short of an article for him to have really gone anywhere with it. So I think there's interesting kind of concepts and ideas that are started, but they're never teased out, and they never really go anywhere with that. Does that make sense? Yeah? I don't know. Okay. Well, one of the things that I thought, one of the fascinating ideas, and so a lot of it is, I mean, he is ending up, I think, taking certain things from Brian McLaren's new book called The Great Spiritual Migration. We will not be talking about that book because I have not read the book and I really know nothing about the book, aside from what is here in this article. But he was going through here in the article, Kristof is, talking about how when we begin to look at different, like especially the different world religions, that, the founders of these religions are oftentimes, they're bold, they're visionaries, they're charismatic, and they're people that come on to take on something or to kind of come against a system. And like in reference to, again, you've got two seminary guys here with microphones, and you begin to look at
turntables. No, we're not that cool.
No, you have a turntable, so don't even say that.
It's true. It's not a spinning
Do you don't have? I thought you had a spinning one too.
I mean, it works. I used to, but I didn't use it enough to justify. That is one of my dreams.
Okay,
it's one of my hopes for my life.
You were more musically inclined than I, so
fun.
I can be the want in the situation. But no. So when we begin to do this, and this is kind of I don't know that there's going to be any answers for all this, but it's I kind of a passion of mine is you begin to look at really the movement that Jesus was starting. It was a movement that was really railing against the establishment, whether it be Rome or whether it be really what Judaism had become at that time.
Certain strands for sure. Because he was, he was kind of a rabbi, so he would have.
Sure, he wasn't like within those power structures, either the Pharisees or the Sadducees. Like he wasn't getting a whole lot of fans. Let's just say that.
Right.
Okay. Within that, and again, Rome didn't have a love fest for Jesus either.
No.
And again, when
they killed him, so
yeah. So, but again, when you go around talking about the less than in society mattering, and you begin to flip a lot of norms kind of upside down, we would say that Jesus is probably one of the first feminists in history. Mm-hmm. And you begin to see that, and then you fast forward 2,000 years, and then you look at where we're at now. Again, our context is the American West, the Western perspective of Christianity, the Western flavoring of Christianity. And so, again, when we're speaking this, because I know we have some listeners from the other side of the globe. So again, I think we can only speak from our own context. Mm-hmm. And even then, I don't know how qualified we are, but
but we have microphones.
We do. We have a microphone, and you don't. So suck it. But
sarcasm.
Please don't leave.
That's true. Otherwise, it's just two sad people talking.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
No, but when you begin to look at it and you begin to say, this is, here are the, here's a movement that was started that had a firm set of ethics. It had a firm drive to it. It had a firm place where it said, we're establishing the kingdom, of heaven here on earth. And, so it wasn't that Jesus wasn't, I'm not saying he was always crystal clear, because he did like to speak in riddles somewhat. But again, you see where it started from, and then you look at where we're at today. And they seem to be two very different places. Mm-hmm. I think one of the teases in the article was, the idea that, would Jesus kind of change? what religion would Jesus really want to hang out with today? Mm-hmm. I know we've probably said this before, but I've heard this before, and there's been books that have been written kind of about this. The idea that if Jesus were to be here today, that exactly the same thing that happened to him 2,000 years ago, pissing off power structures, and eventually getting killed, would probably happen again today. Mm-hmm. Meaning that the church as it is today would probably not embrace the Messiah that they like to talk about and sing about every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I even wonder, in what ways would I miss it? Because, we do talk about Jesus kind of questioning power structures, but there was also this side to him where he was very confident. Mm-hmm. When he spoke things, it wasn't sort of let's think about, he did speak in parables, and some things were a little confusing and ambiguous, but there were other times where he was very bold. And I know that I would push back against that if I heard someone kind of coming out and claiming certain things, that there's a part of me that would want to push against that. So I even wonder that those of us that are maybe aligned more towards Jesus' subversive side, if we also would be on the anti side, just because not wanting to hear this guy coming along with the answer sort of thing. But
that's true. I don't know. I don't know if would we see something that was right in plain sight of mm-hmm. what's going on?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that. But
I think Casting Crowns wrote a song about this, didn't he?
I would have no idea. My guess is no.
I just wanted to hear how you react.
Okay. At first, I was stumbled on two, one that anyone would think that I would know of any Casting Crown songs.
They did, though. They did write a song.
Did they really do this?
Yeah,
okay.
It was like a Christmas song. It's basically like if Jesus were born again, then, everyone would also miss the Messiah or something like that.
Aw.
Yeah.
That seems very...
Sorry, I just wanted to hear
that seems
your
very
reaction.
bold of them. Because they don't, you know, like a lot of those folks, like they're not like rocking very controversial or very deep theology or ideas in the songs they're writing.
No, there have to be references to water though.
I did see, yes, yeah, lots of water.
Sorry, I took us off track there a little bit.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
While we're off track, can I just mention that?
Please do.
Every once in a while, I try to go back and listen to shows that people are commenting on and. That
you really just like hearing yourself.
Well, actually, no, that's not where this is going at all.
Kidding.
Because when I hear my voice, I just realize that I kind of sound like a Muppet. I feel like if if it were just my voice and then someone had to create like a body around my voice, it would be very Muppety.
Yeah. That's amazing. Anyway. I'll have to start imagining you as a Muppet now.
Yeah. Maybe we can have Muppets made of us. Anyway, I'm way off in left field.
No.
Sorry, I was just listening to my voice and I'm like, this is surreal. I really feel like I should be a Muppet.
Well, life goals.
Yeah.
You finish OT school. Check. Man. Become a Muppet. That's next on your list.
I'm going to start.
Could you pull off ventriloquism?
I tried.
Did you really?
I was just
was it like sock puppet, or you really had like one of those like little like
loser when I was young? I mean, I did magic tricks and juggled and ventriloquism and all that awesome stuff that
Pokemon.
The ladies love that kind of stuff.
How
sarcasm?
Wait, which is did you really have? Oh, you're sarcastic. You're sarcastic.
No, I really did all that stuff.
Oh, okay.
The sarcasm was that anyone would be impressed by it.
Okay, well, there's You could have grown up and been a carny.
It's true.
There's still, I mean, that's a niche market.
No, I did try ventriloquism for a while though.
Like, what is a while? Like, every kid I think tries it like a little bit.
Well, I'm a mile wide and a foot deep, so I mean, probably on and off for a long time.
Okay, so did you?
The boy bought the basketball, and having to say that without moving your jaw. Have you tried that?
No.
We're way off in left.
No, it's okay, but now I'm really curious about this. No, did you actually own? Well, it's just a dummy, right? Is that what you? Is that
no? I did not own a dummy.
Oh, okay.
No.
So it was like puppets.
Yeah,
or like your hand.
That. I mean, I have finger puppets on my refrigerator right now. So
yes, but their mouth doesn't move. So because
that's true.
I mean, it'd be easy to do the ventriloquism if it doesn't have a moving mouth.
That's true.
I don't know. Okay.
Anyway.
That's just, wow.
Would Jesus have been a ventriloquist?
That's probably not the best form of communication.
No.
I don't know. Can the Sermon on the Mount through a dummy?
Make the people's angry and... Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's interesting though. This article I will get us back on topic. I'm sorry.
No, but I will say this, that for some reason I've noticed this, that I think ventriloquists, they only really exist for like the weird TV talent shows, kind of in like the stand-up kind of area of that,
or the Tonight Show,
those kind of situations. I'm assuming at circus type things, maybe, but again, churches.
Yeah, that's true. Vacation Bible School.
Yes, No. I'm not just saying puppets. I'm actually saying is like people that are ventriloquist, and it was what is it? The footprints in the sand. That famous...
The poster or whatever.
It's a poem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is years ago, but we were at a church, and the guy and his wife tour, and they also do ventriloquism. Well, she's kind of his assistant.
Oh.
But her claim to fame is doing the footprint. What? I don't even know what it's called.
While drinking water? Does he read the footprints while drinking
water?
No.
That's not part of it, but that's like part of her attraction to doing that. Yeah, like... I couldn't even really quote any. I was going to try to have some sort of like a snarky quote from it, but I can't even remember because it's so deep and dear to my heart. If I was to recite it at all, I would break down in tears.
Mm-hmm. But
sarcasm.
So in this article, it just makes me think of H.R. Niebuhr's Kingdom of God in America. He writes about this. His sort of what he sees like as the progression of these movements in Christianity that, take Luther, for example. You have someone who is moved, who has this very deep religious experience with God, and then is moved to do something. And people are, vitalized around that person, and they all are, making change and doing things. And as time moves on, and you get more and more removed from that person. I think he calls it like crystallization. The movement sort of settles within.
It becomes like a monument.
Yeah. Yes. Literally,
or the movement becomes a monument,
metaphorically.
Yeah.
Because you get like buildings and statues and books or whatever, and it just sort of the inertia or the weight of those things. It's weighs the movement down, and then it's different than it was. And then I don't know. I can't remember if he goes all the way back to Jesus, but I think there is sort of that idea that the further away you get from that experience, it's hard to live into it in your own way. And at least I know that Niebuhr was at least somewhat influenced by Kierkegaard, but that's one thing I really appreciate about Kierkegaard is he understood that it's, yes, there are all these other things of the language we use and what we do and sort of the logic of our world around us. And I'm not saying it's just the individual's experience, but it's extremely important what we do with or how we experience these things.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, that's kind of what I'm hearing in this, that, that we've gotten so far away from kind of that moment in time that Jesus, might look around if he were to come and he would be very confused as to what's going on.
Well, what's interesting is, and I don't know if this is obvious for everybody, but pretty much, or I would say most, if I don't want to sound too hyperbolic, but most denominations were founded by somebody having some sort of experience or disagreement, but something that they felt that God was fueling them to do. Mm-hmm. And then again, they established, we have a system that it gets established, and then the bureaucracy happens, and everything becomes weighed down. And because what's interesting is, I always feel like once you get hung up, even, like you can think of like the Methodists, you can think of the Lutherans, like something happens, and that kind of is like their I don't know, where they stuck the flag in the sand, and then they just kind of camp there. They don't keep moving. You know what I mean? Sometimes it doesn't happen. That sometimes like history can end up hampering, I think, people experiencing God now, or I guess historic institutions maybe is more accurate. But that my bigger question is something I've kind of been wrestling through with that, because it's easy. Like that's one of the, I feel like it's a thing that gets said a lot around like Christian circles, like, oh, we just want to be like the early church. You know what I mean? Like we want to be like a church that's just like it was in the book of Acts.
Yeah.
Everything else like that too, to where, oh, okay, so are you speaking culturally? Are you speaking, how are we talking? Like, are we going to be like absolutely literally like they were? But it ends up being kind of, that's like a buzz phrase that people use. But at the same time, I'm not saying that we have to completely go back there and erase like the history that's happened between there and now. My question really that I wrestle with, and I was just curious what you would say about this, what do we, like when you're wrestling through these things, like what do you hold on to and what do you let go of?
Yeah, I like that I was going to say, I think a charitable way of sort of saying the other side of this is that, we do, the world does change, and we need to hear God now. And not just, keep pining. That's what we criticize this so often on the show, that people pine for this era that never necessarily existed. And yet every time a church says, well, this is the way that Jesus would have done it, and then sets up some new way of doing it, is that not just as foolish as, sort of criticizing the things that are already here?
Or it ends up just being a reaction to some other thing that was going on.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And not necessarily like, oh, and again, I'm not anti-reforming things, but I do think that we can end up, idolizing certain periods or certain times or certain individuals. But
and I'm not sure that maybe some Protestants don't know that. The Catholic Church was reforming even without Luther. There were other reformations that happened, and there was a Catholic Reformation around the same time as the Protestant Reformation. So it's not like people weren't trying to fix things going on in the. I don't know. I think at least in the churches in which I grew up, I saw, or I was taught that the Reformation was a necessity because the Catholic Church was so greedy, and you sort of see the Catholics as like Chaucer, how Chaucer wrote about the Catholics, where everything's corrupt and greedy and everyone's out for
and there's
themselves.
always a eunuch involved.
Yes, and the eunuch is running around eating honey. But I feel like it was helpful to actually learn the history of the Catholic Church. That there was a Catholic Reformation, and again, I just think it can be very easy to kind of buy into these very superficial descriptions of, the early church was this. I mean, we could kind of go back to the biblical literalism episode and say, I think a lot of people do. They open up their Bibles and they say, well, the Acts church doesn't look like the church now. It looks like the one that I'm dreaming about right now. So that's what we're going to do. But I mean, that's not necessarily being faithful to, I just think you're skipping a step of humility in kind of setting things, just another church that people are supposed to follow.
No, I'm with you there. I mean, and that's the hard thing. I mean, because again, I mean, this is like that we stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us. And, so I think that for us to be able to go through and trash church history, and then simply go back to the beginning, you're going to lose a lot of voices that I think can help to inform things, especially about what's even going on now. Because, if we're even trying to hop all the way back into getting into the mindset of what it was like in the early church, I mean, it's impossible. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I've read plenty of books about, the cultural history, what was going on back then, everything else like that too. But still, how does that fit into 2016, where we're living in a place that is very materialistic and capitalistic and everything else? Not that those things, certain aspects of those things didn't exist back then, but it is different. And so I think that, even for us to see the progression of how it's gone, even if I don't agree with all of the progression for how it's gone, I still think that there are lessons to learn in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like it's ironic. There's kind of a hypocrisy at the heart of. I'm sure that you've experienced this in your ministerial background, but I know even trying to be like a youth. It wasn't even a youth pastor. I was, for one summer during college, I was going to work at a Baptist church near my hometown.
That's what most college kids.
Yeah, was just.
No, I'm kidding. Keep going.
Okay.
That's not
that
you
hit this.
Sarcasm.
I needed that one. You should have hit it. But it was a Baptist church, and it was some sort of like youth pastor position, but like associate for the summer. And anyway, I had to sit before like 8 different people that were like heads or whatever in this Baptist church, and sort of affirm Baptist thought and affirm Baptist history. And it was so important because I had gone to a Methodist church, and they were horrified that I was going to spread all this, evil doctrine to their people, their kids.
And were they paying you at all, or was it like minimum wage?
No, it was minimum wage.
Okay, it's a high bar,
right? Exactly,
for low pay, which is pretty much all church work.
But it's just interesting because, and I'm not saying every single Baptist church in the world does this, but the Baptist churches in which I grew up and was raised tended to think of Catholicism as this sort of hegemonic, it was, you only learn the Catholic history and that's all there is. And the bright shining beacon of the Protestant Reformation was that we got to think for ourselves. And here I am in this boardroom having to parrot a bunch of Baptist history and doctrine and things like that. So I just found it ironic. And I think part of that was why when I did become a pastor in college ministry, and I saw that we had people from all sorts of different backgrounds within the church. We had Catholic people from Catholic backgrounds, from different Protestant backgrounds, and also from non-Christian backgrounds. That it was more helpful to be affirming of people's traditions than to be whatever the opposite of affirming.
Yeah, tearing them
negating.
Down or bashing them. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I feel like especially within the church, it's helpful to kind of affirm people's traditions because that's the logic within which they were raised.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they were just, hurt and decimated by that tradition, things are going to make sense within that logic, within that language. So I don't know, all that to say, I think it's more helpful for us to learn our history, to learn, our history, kind of a capital O, Catholic Church, capital C, as a church, than to sort of go with the lowercase histories.
Are Christians the only ones that do that? What you just did?
What, capitalize something to make it universal?
But use it in like common language. No, I don't mean like grammatically. I'm saying is you've heard people talk about like in normal conversation. We're talking about big C church here, not little C church.
Big C church.
Yeah. Something like,
big,
what I mean? Like
Buddhism.
Yeah.
Versus little
yeah.
you
don't hear that in other ones. I don't know. Where there's
maybe they have other
there's
words
somehow
for it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
No, but even speaking that, this is still kind of, I don't even know how much on the point it is, but like with being able to respect other traditions, this is when I was younger, but I was part of, I remember, it was, again, we both grew up Baptist, but the church I was in, they were teaching us how to evangelize. And I knew people in the church that would target Methodist because Baptists didn't think that they really knew the Bible or anything else, or ultimately, since the Methodists would refer to this as baptizing babies,
right?
And since you baptize babies, like we need to go and we need to get these Methodists, converted. They need to have a come to Jesus moment,
right?
And a lot of that had to do also with the fact that, one, I think without understanding other traditions, to where even though I know the Methodists would use the term baptism, it's still more like a christening or a baby dedication. It's
like
kind
of a confirmation.
It's kind of affirming like the call, the God's grace that's over the child's life, but it isn't simply that somehow that the salvation happened does that make sense? Like in the water, because Baptists are very distrustful of anything that remotely seems Catholic,
right?
They're kind of like I feel like it's like on the religious spectrum. You have like, I don't know, like the witchcraft and the occult on one side, but the Catholics aren't far off.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, in that in that mindset that people are into, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because they're not the most ecumenical group.
But
if I'm speaking in large,
right?
Overgeneralizing.
But I just feel like as I don't know, at least in my experience, it's helpful to respect the history that's there and to use that to inform the present rather than trying to jump backwards in time over that history and somehow recreate the original church now.
Again, we have the whole overused phrase, history repeats itself. But I think that like a lot of the struggles that we have today, I think you can find context for those situations when you begin to look over the history, especially when you're talking a history that's spanning 2,000 years. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it may not be like the exact situation, but there's similarities that people have wrestled through. There's conversations that have already happened before. And I'm not talking in a metaphysical sense. I'm talking like literally, you know what I mean? Like the idea that somehow that, like what you're saying is that you're at a point in history and you can figure out all this stuff that no one's tried before. No one's thought of before. Right. I mean, it comes from a place of grand arrogance. And I think, but again, I think that, when we're talking about somewhat what's wrong with the American church, I think that there is a whole thing of grand arrogance in a lot of the denominations and a lot of the pastors that are out there towards what needs to be done. So, which again, I think it gets caught up in the whole like American success system that the church very much mirrors today.
And I'm going to say something that will probably be very controversial. So please. Feel free. We might actually have our first like all out argument here on the air. But I think one thing that I kind of going along with what you were just saying, I think there's an arrogance in this article. This is one of the things that I bristle against with certain newer church movements. This all out sort of attack on the idea of doctrine. Yeah. And I guess I think there's an arrogance of thinking, just like you were just saying, where, I'm going to do something that no one else has ever done before, where I'm kind of recreating the original church, that somehow you can live without beliefs, that somehow you can live without some sort of doctrine governing over you. And really, I feel like a lot of times the doctrine just reflects kind of the world we're living in now. And I just feel like there's an arrogance of reaching beyond these ancient contexts and traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation, and saying, well, we're going to live outside of those things now. It's more about what we're doing and not about what's in our brains or our beliefs. But I don't know. To me, that's almost kind of the other side of arrogance, that stuff isn't still functioning in some way.
So what am I going to argue with you about?
I don't know. I didn't know if you would agree with me on that one or not.
No, I mean, I think
the importance of doctrine or the importance
I think
of beliefs.
I do. I think there's an importance to it, but I think at any time, I think we have to wrestle with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? I think that we can, and I think that there's times for us to challenge stuff because depending upon doctrine gets thrown around a lot. But I mean, a lot of times doctrine can be a set of beliefs. It could be a set of values, depending upon, the denomination or how the church is set up. And, I think that certain things, certain doctrines or certain things that get established or put into place, because we were picking on the Baptists today because it's low-hanging fruit.
Especially for us.
Yeah, I know. But like there was like the what was like the Baptist? It was something like the faith message. It was around 2000 when they came out with this. And I remember it was a few years back when I was looking for jobs, like I kept seeing that over and over again. Like, you must affirm the I can look it up later. Affirm this doctrine. That was one of the main things, like that was like on this, to apply to this. And it's not like it happened once. It was over and over and over and over again. I would see this, which also led me to say, why am I looking at Baptist churches anymore? Because because there was a lot of language and a lot of wording in this whole thing that they had, and they were holding it as if it's doctrine. They were holding it. It was this thing that was, you needed to engrave it in stone tablets because it was that good.
Right.
And when you read through it, there was a lot of language in it that I would be like, I would love to have a conversation with you folks about this, because some of this I thoroughly disagree with. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there's certain things that have stood the test. I mean, you can think of like the Apostles' Creed, things that have kind of like, because I feel like there's been doctrine or there's been statements, and they come and go, and they'll change, with whichever tribe you're hanging out with. But I think that there's certain ones, and some of the things, like when I go back to, when I go back to the Apostles' Creed, you look at it and it's simple and it's basic. And I think things like that are why it stood the test of time, because you can breathe life into it. You can breathe context into it. You can breathe situations into it. And if you've ever gone over like a lot of different doctrine for different denominations, they get very specific.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they get very, very specific real fast, which also tells you they're writing this because they're mad about this or because they're trying to confront this. And I think what that begins to do, and I think, because again, if you've hung around churches for any time, the doctrine can become a weapon that they use to say you're in and you're not.
It's like a measuring stick.
Yeah, somewhat. And so I think a lot of times, I think that we have to be able to leave certain things up. I mean, because there was things that Jesus was specific about, but there's things that Jesus was ambiguous about.
And things that Jesus pushed against and sort of transgressed or stepped across. And
so I think some of it, I think that, again, you see what it began, if we even want to talk about the Jewish tradition, what began as like the 10 Commandments, then there's more commandments and more commandments and more commandments, and you get to the time of Jesus where they have like a rule for everything, that you can think of. And so again, these doctrines or other things can become something that is just a weight upon people, or ones that you create doctrines that keep people out. And so I think that one, I think when we get really specific with doctrines in these manners, I think we're doing it because we don't trust people. You know what I mean? Like, we're having to spell it out exactly. We don't trust for you to be able to walk your faith out in a way that is with God, and in a way that that honors your own humanity and your own intelligence. because it ends up being a control structure, and I think that's what a lot of the bureaucratic institutions of a lot of the churches, they become control structures, and I think that's why a lot of times when people think of God, they think of a God that is very controlling and rule based and very much not for them.
And here I was thinking we were going to disagree.
I'm sorry, disappointed you.
Yeah. Are we ever going to have a fight on here?
I don't know. I think it's both of our personalities too.
No, I agree with everything you said. I thought that was stated in a really good way, and I always liked the idea of doctrine as something you live into instead of living under.
Yeah,
and
that's a good way of putting it.
Something that you're excited about and not fearful of. And I know that I think there are new conceptions of doctrine where people are trying to like keep the doctrine there, but they're saying, yeah, but they're movable and things like that. But I like to think of it more as that's kind of the space within which I like you said, like breathe or live. That's the space within which you kind of grow. Because, we're not like boundless creatures that are going to be able to be everywhere and do everything.
Yeah.
So it sort of gives you, it's like fertile ground for you to be able to like plant your roots and then grow and flourish.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with that, because I think that a lot of times what begins to happen is if the doctrine that you have is impeding justice or it's impeding mission, I think you have to question it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, if it's impeding the things that Christ had told you to do, if it's impeding you in the way that you reach out to help others, if it's impeding how you serve people, if it's impeding which people you're allowed to serve and which people you're not allowed to serve, I think that then you begin to question it. Because I think most doctrine, because, and people or in churches, they will back it with scripture, because that's the way we do it. Right. But I think a lot of times it's a lot of scripture that's not in context. And I think there are things that become weights on people as they are trying to go out and do mission. Because, one of the issues I think a lot of folks have, and this is why we return to this. When you look back at the early church, they were very light. There was no hierarchy. There was not a huge structure to the whole thing. But because of that lightness, because of that lack of hierarchy, it was able to move in a way. It was able to reach out to people in a way where all of this bureaucracy, all of this doctrine, all these other things didn't impede it from moving. And so I think what begins to happen is when we set up institutions, I think it slows movement. And I think once you've slowed the movement, it's become, like we said earlier, it's just become a monument. And you've just effectively killed whatever the heart of the gospel was.
Yeah, it can certainly, it can be a signpost or it can be a distraction. Yeah, I think because I like cathedrals. I like religious art and those sorts of things. But I think part of it is because it does remind me of how much more there is, and it's something that I've always thought of art as something that kind of moves you or pushes you in a direction. It's more than just your brain sort of processing. It's, we've talked a lot about kind of art on the show, and there's art that sort of tells you what to think or tells you what to do, and then there's art that moves you. And I think beauty is at the heart of that sort of art. And I think, some of these things throughout Christian history have been things that have moved people and inspired and pushed and challenged. And then, some things are just giant, kind of stagnant, static things that it's more of a distraction. It's more of a, it's less about fluidity and more about, or less about movement and more about just sort of sitting still.
Well, and even, two things, from which is interesting. So going back to when we started on talking about horror films and Christian films being way too on the nose, I think the idea of inspiration comes when you don't explain everything, when you let people experience it for themselves. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You can't control people's experience. I think people try to, especially on Sunday mornings, they'll try to control your experience. But I think, how art impacts you is the fact that you read into it what you need to read into it. There's history that you would see in it. There's experiences you would see in it that I wouldn't see. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So your inspiration would be different than my inspiration, but that doesn't make that inspiration not real.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It's like the different parts of the body that Paul talked about. I mean, I think that in and of itself gives at least some credence to the fact that people are going to experience different things in different places.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself doesn't disqualify you from being part of the body. You know, the hand is not going to experience the same thing as the foot. But, you know, it at the same time, it shouldn't say, why am I a foot? Why can't I be a hand? It also shouldn't say, you know, well, the hand's not part of the body.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and with that, but what I will say, the only one thing, and I'm not, this is as close to disagreement as we're going to come to, because it's not even really one. But you were talking about being inspired by cathedrals. I love them as well, too. But to think about what it would, like if someone were to offer me a cathedral to do a church in, I would say no. And I would say no.
You would take the field.
Huh?
You would take the field or the...
Well, I mean, that's, for me, would be, I mean, the idea, and we're talking about what are things that are impediments to Christianity and church today. I mean, one of the quickest ways to kill a movement is to build a building that you have to pay for. You know what I mean? True. I mean, the upkeep on hey, we were joking about this. I think it was on that previous show where I was joking about just the money and the wealth of the Catholic Church and everything else like that too. But one benefit is it gets to keep those cathedrals going. And, you know, but but when we look at, if you want to look at the early church, you know, it was very, like I said earlier, it was fluid. There weren't all those constraints. And once you have a building, once you have to pay insurance on that, you know, once you have upkeep on this, then you have to turn this into a business somehow. You know, I mean, and that ends up being the necessity for a lot of churches to be a business. Now, they would say they're not a business, they're a 501c3 nonprofit, but they function simply just like a business. They do not function like a movement anymore.
Yeah, and I realized as soon as you started describing that, there, especially in the United States, gigantic buildings that I think are considered to be supposed to be monuments to God's greatness that I think are just disgusting and ugly, and I think it's more monuments to people's own greatness. So yeah, I don't think just, you know, for the sake of it being a big building, but again, that I think it can serve it can serve that purpose of sort of pointing towards God and pointing towards this sort of gigantic story that there's way more going on than I think our little brains tend to realize most of the time, but it also can be, you know, very, very small in that way, that all this does is reflect this one person and their success. So, yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one, that there's also, I think we need to not just idealize it and say, you know, this is a building and it's beautiful and it's a signpost to God's kingdom, but also to say, well, how many people died building this? You know, how many people could be eating right now because this thing is still, the lights are still on in this place.
Way to be a Debbie Downer.
So, wah, wah.
I know.
Yeah.
Though I was thinking along those lines as well.
And I also think, you know, in hearing you describe that, I think it's also important to point out that people, I think, need different things from different positions. That's one thing I really appreciate about Walter Brueggemann is he doesn't want to say that every single voice in the Old Testament or in the Bible is sort of speaking from the same like position in life. And especially you look at the Psalms. I mean, some Psalms, people need certain Psalms depending on where they are. And I think, again, that affirms the different parts in the body. And we need to appreciate that, you know, there are people going through different things. And just because one thing doesn't speak to me in a certain way right now, doesn't mean that I won't need, you know, that later on. Maybe I'm at a lower point in life, or there are some people who live low points for most, if not all of their lives, and they need, you know, certain words spoken to them. And just to realize that, you know, our perspective and kind of our position in the world is not the position in the world.
So real quick, we started off by talking about, and these are kind of going to roll into closing thoughts. We started out talking about how if you look at any like religion, you end up starting in one way and then years later it's in this other place. So free for all, Ben, I just want to know, and again, I know we're speaking in overarching terms here. We're throwing blankets over everything just for the sake of brevity and for the sake of, I'm not trying to get you to think too deep. because I know you do. You'll get the shovel out and start going to town. But but again, and being able to look at this in light of not saying like, oh, we just have to be like the first century church, or we have to just be like, I don't know, whatever tradition we're in. What, like, when we talk about the fact that Jesus would probably not be accepted or welcomed into the modern day American Christian churches, what would you change, or what do you think is needed to get things closer to being on mission? If that is, I don't know. Does that make sense?
I guess my kind of first principles are always just wondering what we're missing. And I think Jesus was so keen on that, and that's really one of the great, I guess, points of his excellence in ministry in the world, is he was just so great at noticing things. And then, not just sort of like sitting up on in a tree or something like, oh, look at that. But, then going and being a part of it, and kind of making that his life. And part of that's probably my own bias, but I think that's something that people, just consideration, and then what you do with that consideration, I think are kind of the starting points to where we might be able to move closer to what Jesus was doing.
Yeah, for me, I think it would just be us eradicating this whole idea of kind of a rock star mentality. And I don't mean it strictly, because I know it's easy to say rock star mentality with mega churches, but I think just the whole hierarchy mentality to how we look at stuff, to where somehow clergy, somehow pastors are above other folks.
Or they're the point.
Yeah, or you're right, the focal point, or even being a little bit above, because everyone gets like shocked, and when someone has a moral failing, people have moral failings because they're people. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It wasn't simply that, oh, he's a pastor, he should have known better. No, he was a human. He had struggles, he has emotions, he has stuff going on with him. You know what I mean? And in the role of being a pastor, it's a very isolating one. So especially all of that kind of going into stuff, it's going to cause people to stumble. But I would love to see the money that churches have go into people and not buildings, not administrative costs, and not into all this other stuff. You know what I mean? Like I would love to be able to just take the whole, just gut it structure wise. Not mission wise, but structure wise, because I think once all of that stuff gets slowed down, I think it ends up becoming something it's not meant to be.
What God didn't mean for us to make the top 10 bestsellers list.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? Those are, and that being a goal. Yeah, those kind of things too. I mean, I know we joke about that all the time, but I do. I think our goals and our trajectory. What I would like to, I guess, ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, I think that we should rejigger in our minds what success is in the Christian context. Because I think by and large, we don't have a friggin' clue. Mm-hmm. And friggin' was my nice radio way of saying that. Because I don't.
Yeah, if Jesus subverted anything, it was success. That's for sure.
Well, it is, because I think like in lots of churches, in a certain way, yeah, we're just driven by the pastor. We're driven by all these other, like, I think the reason people go to church a lot of times, I think that we've turned everything very inward. But again, that mirrors culture. But I just think that, I think it needs to go back to just being simple, being light, and being about people, and not in a way, an internal way. Because again, I think Jesus wanted to change the world, wanted to change the way people were, wanted to usher in this whole idea of what God's kingdom looked like. And I think when we look around at the churches around here in our communities, I don't think that we're going to yeah, mission accomplished, like George Bush style. Mm-hmm. I don't see that.
No church left behind.
That's such a packed statement you had there. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I do. I think that that you have to be able to say just what, God's mission trumps everything else.
Yeah, and I would kind of wrap in what I said with what you said, just that, being considerate, or considering kind of the unconsidered things, seeing the unseen things. That is looking outside of your church or your comfort zone, or looking outside of your little rock star circle that you built.
Because I will tell you, and you've known this, working for churches in the past, 95% of the work that you do ends up really being to making the machine go.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, like actual time noticing, like you're saying, just noticing, and actual time really investing deep in people, not so much.
Yeah.
And so anytime that you've got like a, 95 to 5 ratio, things are a little off.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll leave it on that. And for you, our dear listeners, give us feedback. What would you change? How would you make it different? What would you fix? What would you keep? I don't know. We love hearing from you. And we love hearing from our buddy Rick, who's emailed us recently. Want to tell him thanks for listening. Thanks for being awesome, Rick. But as we get to the end of this broadcast, just a reminder that you can catch us on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com. We are also on Facebook. We are also on Twitter. That is all we got this week, but thank you so much for joining us again, and we will catch you again next week. We're out of here.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Aqueduct Conference Centre was established in 1978 as a peaceful destination for small group meetings, special events, conferences, retreats, and weddings. For more information, go to www.aqueductcc.com. We are also sponsored by Lumen. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be better than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.